Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Wenz World. And we bring the finest organizations and our good friends. Today, we are bringing back the president of Reasons to Believe, Dr. Fazale Rana. Dr. Fuzz, welcome back to the show. I feel like it's been years.
Yeah, it's been a while, Joey, and I've missed the times that we would hang out together. So I'm real excited to have this chance to spend some time with you. And I just have to tell you this, knowing that you're an Eagles fan. So, but just two doors down the hall from me, one of my coworkers, she and her husband are huge Eagles fans. They bleed green. And so during the football season, all I hear is blah, 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 Eagles, blah, 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 Eagles. No, but in all seriousness, hey, the Eagles are well represented at Reasons to Believe. You should know that.
That's awesome. That's great. And you'll hear a lot of Go Birds, and on the rare occasion that they lose, you won't hear much because
Right.
we're not fun to be around that whole week. But football season's about a month away. But about a month prior to this interview, there were big discoveries made in Spain. Now, before we talk about what the actual discovery is, it had to do with, I guess some people would call them our distant ancestors, cousins, the Neanderthal. And you, having an extensive background in the scientific community, you can provide some context for this discovery that we're going to get to. But before we get to that, I kind of want to unpack and unearth what it meant to be a Neanderthal and perhaps some of the differences between them and us before we get going to the actual topic at hand today.
Yeah, well, Neanderthals were these creatures that are called hominins that lived roughly 300,000 to about 40,000 years ago when they went extinct. And they lived primarily in the Middle East, Spain, and in East Asia. So that was where they were located. And evolutionary biologists think that Neanderthals and modern humans, which is us, shared an evolutionary ancestor maybe about 500 or 600,000 years ago that gave rise to two distinct lineages. Now, one of the big questions in anthropology is who was that ancestor? Nobody's been able to actually identify a creature in the hominin fossil record that could function as that ancestor. But nevertheless, that's how evolutionary biologists view humans and Neanderthals. And really, one of the big questions regarding Neanderthals were, what were they like? Were they like us? Clearly, they had some measure of intelligence and emotional capacity, but were they like us? Were they our cognitive equals? Or were they inferior to us in some capacity? Because they went extinct and we didn't. And so many people think that extinction may reflect the fact that they just simply weren't on par with us in terms of their intellectual firepower. But everybody loves Neanderthals for whatever reason. We're fascinated by them. And I think in part it's because they do have similarities to us. And the question of who were Neanderthals and what were they like has bearing on how we think about ourselves as human beings too, right? Because are we unique in the world? Are we exceptional in terms of our, sophisticated cognitive abilities? Or were there other creatures like us that just happened to no longer be with us, like Neanderthals? So big questions really surrounding Neanderthals that ultimately impact how we think about ourselves as human beings.
That's big time. Here with Dr. Fazale Rana from reasons.org. You can find him online at just that location, reasons.org. Also on the socials, RTB_official. And you got to check out their YouTube channel at Reasons to Believe. This is where I actually discovered this interview that Dr. Fazale Rana gave on the YouTube channel. I watched it, and I also saw some of the response to it. And so we're going to get to some of the pushback before we conclude this, because I think it's important to address skepticism, to address questions, because questions lead to answers. But as far as the coexistence between human beings and the modern human, right, that we call ourselves, and Neanderthals, you said that Neanderthals were on Earth between 500, 600,000 years ago. how long has the modern human been on Earth for?
Yeah, well, from the scientific record, it appears as if modern humans, us, show up maybe about 130,000 years ago,
Okay.
right? So, Neanderthals, were on Earth for easily 200, 250,000 years. And one of the things that's really very interesting in light of that, and this has bearing on what we think about Neanderthals, is that Neanderthals, their technology, if you will, their really didn't change over the duration of their existence. It was pretty static. Whereas we as modern humans had primitive technology when we, first appeared here on Earth. But within the time that we've existed, we've been able to expand our technology. Our technology has grown in sophistication to the point that we put human beings on the moon, that we now have the ability to manipulate organisms to create artificial, non-natural life forms. No other creature that has ever existed has had that capability. And so right away, that difference in the trajectory of our technologies really suggests that there's something really special about human beings compared to even Neanderthals, as remarkable as they were.
Now, we know that they had different brain structures, so that could definitely lend to that trajectory of technology and evolution, I guess, for the lack of a better term. But they also had different genomes, right? So this would lead to different cognitive abilities and neurodevelopment.
Yeah.
This undoubtedly explains the difference in their ability to be less technologically savvy, but also could have also explained their demise ultimately, right? Because adapt or die.
Yeah.
The discovery that was made in late June kind of has people tripping, right? Because the discovery was of a 6-year-old, right? Perhaps a 6-year-old Neanderthal who was discovered to have a developmental disability known as Down syndrome. And I have a cousin with Down syndrome. He's one of the most wonderful people you'll ever want to be around. There's nothing ever wrong. Like, he's always in a great mood. I'm actually very jealous because he seems to be in perfect joy no matter what's going on around him. I almost feel like it's the joy of the Lord in some ways. But these people physically are different because they possess an extra chromosome, the 21st chromosome, which is also why some trisomy 21. But that's just the basics. But how does this flesh out? Because they found a Neanderthal who doesn't share the same brain structure, who has different genomes. Did they have an equal pairing, 23 and 23, to make 46 plus the one? How does that work out? I'm very confused by this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't have, while we do have the complete Neanderthal genome, we don't really have any evidence for what the chromosomal structure looked like. But from the DNA sequences, you can infer that they most likely had 23 pairs of chromosomes. And, nobody really knows much about the natural history of Down syndrome, right? So that's one reason why this discovery was so significant, because it looks like Neanderthals suffered from Down syndrome as well, or at least some individuals did, right? And so presumably they would have had, that chromosome 21, the trisomy, right, where there would be 3 copies of that particular chromosome. So that's the inference, but they really didn't make that determination from the genetics, but rather they made that inference from a partial skull fragment. And as you were mentioning, this is really science at its best. This is cutting edge science where it was just a part of a partial skull bone that corresponded to the temporal region. And that's the part of the skull that protects the inner ear. And so this fossil fragment was discovered in 1989 at a site called Cova Negra in Spain. And they just cataloged it and stuck it in storage. And these Spanish researchers came upon it and became intrigued by it. And it wasn't MRI, but it was something similar. It's CT scanning, where using X-rays, you can literally reconstruct the fossil in its fine details in 3 dimensions. And they were actually able to reconstruct the inner ear. And it was there in the anomalies of the inner ear that they concluded that this this child, which was 6 years of age, must have had Down syndrome. It's the only condition that matches the specific distortions of the inner ear that they observed. There are other, disorders that cause hearing loss and loss of balance, but none of them match the features of the inner ear. So it's an incredible piece of science to be able to, number one, even image the inner ear, and then to be able to draw that kind of conclusion about Neanderthals having, Down syndrome. So amazing stuff.
Yeah, and I have so many follow-up questions to that because I'm just thinking in modern terms, like how we support each other. Nowadays, there are support groups or specific learning facilities. There are homes dedicated, nonprofits solely dedicated to the development of people with Down syndrome, helping them become independent in this world, to live a life apart from some group homes, right? Some people are able to do that. But let's just be honest. This was a different time. This was, 500,000 years ago, essentially. These people didn't know they were going to eventually die out, but they're no longer with us. To me, objectively saying, I'm not trying to be heartless here, but it seems almost crazy that this individual survived for that long. Like, because if you think about it, what does somebody with a disability offer the community? What can they possibly offer you? They're a drag, and I'm not calling people, hear me right, people. I love you, but think about it in terms of tribal necessity and survival of the fittest. Apart from a deistic mindset where there's an innate human dignity, where we view these creatures as being an image of God, so to speak. And I want to get into that with you too, because those are very important words that you use in the video. But to me, I thought this thing would have been thrown to the wolves or eaten, right?
Yeah.
How did this creature survive for 6 years? Because it seems to me like somebody had some compassion on this creature.
Yeah. Well, and this is where this study goes from being an example of science at its best to, I think, speculation that is probably unwarranted, right? Where the researchers are trying to elevate Neanderthals to our status as modern humans. And so they argue, along the lines that you're pointing out. Look, this was a 6-year-old that probably was deaf, suffered from vertigo, really couldn't contribute to the group, and the mother would have had to spend full time in care of this. Therefore, this must be an example of what's called compassionate or empathetic altruism, where you're just being kind and helping another individual survive without any sense of reward whatsoever. So altruism is observed in the animal world but it's reciprocal. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. I'm going to be nice to you because in the future, you'll be nice to me, right? And so, it's clear that Neanderthals cared for members of their group who had disease or who had injuries. So there's Neanderthal remains where it's clear that individual had a disease or an injury and lived a number of years beyond, the disease or that injury. So this assumption is the group cared for that individual, but you can't really rule out whether it was reciprocal altruism or an empathy. So here they argue this is a clear example of, empathetic altruism, because there's no way that this individual could have really contributed to the group. But there are other people who said, wait a minute. We don't really know that. There's other scenarios that we could imagine. So first of all, as you're pointing out with your cousin, it's wrong to think that people with Down syndrome don't have anything to contribute to the group, right? Just everybody who's interacted with somebody with Down syndrome probably has a similar story to yours, right? They're wonderful people that exude joy. And that provides group cohesion, right? So to say that individual wasn't contributing to the group may not be actually fair. Also, it could be that the group shunned that child, right? Or was indifferent to the child. but the mother with intense maternal instincts cared for that child, and maybe people helped her because she was prominent in the group, and they figured that she could help them in the future, right? Or maybe she had that there were siblings that helped the mother care for this child. So there's other ways to interpret this without necessarily appealing to empathetic altruism. And here's where some other studies come into play. One was a study done by a Japanese team in Tanzania observing chimpanzees, a group of chimpanzees, and one of them gave birth to an infant that looked like it had Down syndrome. And the group was indifferent to the infant. The mother cared for it with the help of one of that infant's siblings, and it died after about 2 years, right? Or other studies have observed in non-human primates disabilities in which it's either, behavioral flexibility that allowed that individual to survive, or the group helped to care for it. So even if Neanderthals were caring for members of their group, it doesn't make them like us, right? It doesn't distinguish them from other primates. Other primates do that very thing. What really makes us different as humans when it comes to altruism is not only do we engage in empathetic altruism where we take care of people in our group, right, in our tribe, but we also are concerned about people that are not in our tribe, right? That, as human beings, we are compassionate and concerned about children in different parts of the world that we never will meet, right? We also are compassionate regarding other creatures, where we do things to benefit other creatures in which we get no return. So I don't think this study undermines our unique nature or exceptional nature as human beings at all. I think there's other ways to interpret this, but it is fascinating, that Neanderthals, did seem to exhibit some kind of care for other members of the group, but it doesn't make them like us because they did that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic insight. And there's definitely pushback online. So under your video, I want to get to some of the pushback. Maybe you can answer them, and I'm going to actually post the link as a comment so they'll be able to hear these answers live. So at Detect Ken, this is 4 weeks ago, he pointed out that, quote, African wild dogs also assist and share food equally with all members. This includes the weak, ill, injured, and elderly, end quote. What say you to that response?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, again, a good example of altruism that you see among animals, right? That are non-human, are non-primates, where they are caring for members of their group, right? And so that's necessary in terms of forming group cohesion, which is critical for the survival of the group. So again, you could see Neanderthals engaged in something similar to wild dogs in Africa, in that it's promoting group cohesion, which promotes their survivability. It doesn't mean that they were necessarily empathetic or that altruism was unique or exceptional. Now, what would be amazing is to see wild dogs sharing food with members of another group, right? Or members of another species, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I can't even picture it. Like I'm sitting here trying to picture it. It's very difficult. That would be a beautiful picture, right? But I don't know if we'd see that in the animal kingdom. One more response before I want to ask you about, what do you believe the image of God is, and why you don't believe that these created beings that look somewhat like us, that shared some traits with us, don't also share that despite being created by the same being. But before we get to that, this is probably the hardest hitting piece of opposition. This is from Dario Lemos, 4583. Quote, what a funky argument. Compassion, love, and attachment must have been key to preserving individuals born with differences that may have appeared strange and disadvantageous at first, and then in subquotes, think clear skin and eyes or narrow hips, but which became critical later on when environments changed. How about we rewrite the Bible to add that on the 8th day, Yahweh made Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Erectus, who were around for more than 1.8 million years. Mamma mia, the things indoctrination makes us say. Cheers, never stop evolving.
Yeah. Maybe to the latter point, and then you can keep pressing if you think I'm not addressing the challenge effectively. But, when we look at the creation accounts, let's say Genesis 1, right? It's very clear that this account was being delivered to people in a pre-scientific time, right? I think the content of Genesis 1 is anticipating scientific discoveries, but it was given to pre-scientific people. And for most of human history, people were pre-scientific. We would have had no understanding of the fossil record, no understanding of things like creatures like dinosaurs or Neanderthals or Homo erectus. So to mention them in scripture would be essentially pointless, right? For that to be part of the revelation. What is the focus of Genesis 1 are creatures that we as human beings would be familiar with in the here and now, but also this was delivered in the ancient Near Eastern context where people at that time were worshiping birds and fish, right, and beasts. And so part of what's being mentioned there is of an apologetic nature, with the idea that, hey, you people in other cultures are worshiping the creation, but really it's the creator who made these things that should be worshiped, right? And so there's no reason to mention Neanderthals or Homo erectus. It doesn't mean these are not creatures that are part of God's creation. It's just that it wouldn't have been meaningful to people. It's only now that we've discovered them that that these questions are raised. And so we need to take biblical principles to assess them, and how to make sense of them. But we also need to rely on the science as well.
Great. Yeah, I have no further questions. And if he does, I'll invite him to, respond to the question with a question, So feel free on the comments, y'all. If you have a question for Dr. Rana, we'll address them on the next episode. We never like to leave things unclear here. So now with those questions answered, this is the one that hits beyond the scientific level, right? Because this takes a certain level of a spiritual eye to see. And from my experience, it's not something that you're born with. It's something that you're given just through God's grace, that he enables some of us to experience certain things. And it's beyond anything I can really explain. It's just something you have to experience for yourself. It's something interesting from a scientific way of approach that you would say that these created beings didn't have the image of God. So what is this image of God? Because we're born in God's image. What does that mean? And what does that mean for us in a real takeaway kind of way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bible doesn't really clearly define what the image of God is. It just simply states that, male and female were made in God's image. And so the implication when we look at Genesis 5 is that everybody who is a descendant of Adam and Eve, of the first humans, likewise bear God's image because we are in Adam and Eve, right? So that's something that seems to be transmitted from generation to generation, and so we are in Adam and we are modern humans now from a scientific perspective. So therefore, I would think it's reasonable that, Adam and Eve too would have been, modern humans, right? And that the people of that time would have had no concept of Neanderthals or Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus. And so it would be odd to think that these creatures would have borne God's image because they were just simply unknown to us. Everybody would have understood that the image of God is associated with humans, with those people which are in Adam, which is the entirety of the human race. Now, theologians have debated what is the image of God. One view is the image of God, which is the view that I favor, is referring to certain capabilities that we uniquely possess as human beings. Another view says, well, no, the image of God is reflects our responsibilities, right? That we were to multiply and fill the earth, subdue the earth, be caretakers of the planet, right? Another view is that, well, the image of God refers to our unique relationship with God, right? And so these are the different views. And in effect, they're not mutually exclusive, right? In fact, I would argue that in order to uniquely be able to carry out certain responsibilities, to be uniquely in a relationship with God, means that there must be something different about us, right? Now, scientifically, what makes modern humans stand out is our capacity for symbolism, that we can represent the world with symbols, we can combine them and recombine them to really tell stories, to create narratives, to provide explanations about the world. It's the basis for language, for music, for art. It allows us to do crazy things like mental time travel, where we can anticipate the future and remember the past. And so this to me is a manifestation of the image of God. It's not, I think the image of God is part of our immaterial nature, but that manifestation of those capabilities to me is the image of God. So I see no evidence that Neanderthals or Homo erectus had that capacity for symbolism. They seem to be cognitively inferior. So it's not to say that they're not remarkable creatures, that they're not fascinating creatures, but to me, there was something missing in them. And this is what I think the science says that we see in modern humans. And for people of faith, we would say that's the image of God, right? For a secular scientist, they would say, well, it's human exceptionalism, right? Or human uniqueness. So to me, I think that's, the science supports the biblical view. And that's why I think it's critical to maintain this idea of human exceptionalism.
Oh, that was going to be my next question. Do you truly believe that we're exceptional in this universe, that we are above the animals that we, save from shelters?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think we are exceptional. And again, people oftentimes conflate this idea of being exceptional with arrogance, all right, or that we think we're better than other life forms, that we have the right to exploit other creatures, that we can do damage to the environment. But if you understand human exceptionalism in the context of the biblical view, because we were exceptional, for those who have much, much is expected, right? And so that means that we are to be caretakers of the planet, that we are to use what's in the world for our benefit as human beings, but we aren't to do damage to the world. We're not to treat life on Earth, disrespectfully or to destroy things. And unfortunately, because we also are in sin, right, because of Adam and Eve's rebellion, we do, instead of being stewards of the planet, we destroy the planet, right? Instead of trying to promote human flourishing, we hurt one another, right? Instead of honoring God, we bring dishonor to God. And so it's the sin nature means that, our exceptional capacity means that not only can we do exceptional good, we can do exceptional evil, unlike anything that you see animals being capable of doing. So I do think we are exceptional, and I think the biblical view explains our exceptional nature, but it also explains why, even though we're exceptional, we don't oftentimes do the right thing.
Wow. Yeah, you just summed up the human experience, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And I can't wait to have you back. We're going to have you back a lot sooner than this time around. And we're going to talk about more of these scientific issues, societal trends. There's this new healing trend that's going on. I've seen a lot of it on the socials. It's Eastern medicine, but you don't actually touch somebody. It's called Reiki. So I'd love to have you back in a few weeks to discuss that, Dr. Rana, and get the scientific perspective, but also the spiritual perspective, because I'm one of those wackadoodle people that believe everything's tied together and that you can't extract somebody's spirit from their body without having a corpse, and vice versa. It's all tied together. My emotional, spiritual, physical well-being all make me who I am, right? And if you're a believer, like you said, we want to use our faculties to the best of our ability because we've been blessed with them. And why not, right? While we're here, Let's be good stewards of the animals, the plants, everything around us. They're tasty, right? But maybe that's their design. But the ones that we don't eat, let's love for them. Let's pet them. Let's take care of them. Take them to the vet, get their shots, spayed and neutered. Being good stewards, right? On an everyday Price is Right level, just simple stuff that we can do as people to make the planet a better place. And that includes some simple things like, I live in the South and people go deer hunting, and some people think it's cruel, but it's actually the opposite of cruel, because you're controlling the wildlife population, because if there's too many of them, then they don't survive, right? It's about balance. And I think ultimately the Lord has given us a model for balance. And if we lean into that and seek him, it's amazing what he reveals. And it's amazing what you've revealed today. Dr. Fazale Rana, president of Reasons to Believe. Find him online, reasons.org, on the socials at RTB_official, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's where I found this interview. Watch it for yourself. I'll post a link in the description so you don't have to do any digging. But until next time, Dr. Fazale Rana, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here in Wenz World. I can't wait to have you back. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Joey.